We have a sugya here in Nazir about a father being makabel Nazirus and imposing Nazirus on his son. We're not sure exactly how old his son is. Either he's less than 12, which means he's less than a muflas samach, or he's less than bar mitzvah. He doesn't have shtei saras, and that's going to be an issue here. But basically, we have a machlokas between Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish in Masechet Nazir, starting on Chav Ches Hamid Beis, going on to Chav Tes, which is today's daf, about why the father has the ability to be mazir, to accept Nazirus on behalf of his son, who's a katan. And there are two possible answers to this question. Chodesh Tov. One is Rabbi Yochanan's answer, and that is halacha l'Moshe b'Sinai. The other is Reish Lakish, and that's the one we're going to focus on today, and that is Kidei Lechancho b'mitzvos, which means that the Rabbanan made an established takana that you should be mechanech your son in mitzvahs. Now, why Nazirus fits into chinuch b'mitzvahs is not crystal clear, and that is because, according to the Rosh, Nazirus comes under what's called precious or kedusha, right? Kedoshim tiyu shetiyu prushim, kadesh atzmecha b'mutalacha. That's what a Nazir comes under. And I'm assuming that the father evaluated his son and made a determination that his son needs a little extra chizuk, and therefore he was makabel Nazirus on behalf of his son, and that is the mitzvah of chinuch. The Gemara asks a number of kashas, raises a whole bunch of objections to Reish Lakish. One of them, which we're going to focus on today, is why is this only the father who's makabel Nazirus on behalf of his son? What about a mother? After all, she, Lechora, should be also obligated in the chinuch of her children, and we'll see various sugyas as to whether or not a mother is obligated in the chinuch of her children on a technical level. The mitzvah of chinuch, the Rabbanan, does it apply to a mother as well as a father? So we have here an essay in the Otzer Yunim called Chinuch Banov, which I hope you have in your phones. And if you'll take a look, we'll go through some of the paragraphs inside, but our goal for today is, Amir Hashem, to get to Reb Ruvain Grozovsky. Reb Ruvain was one of the great scholars of the Brisker Mahalacha of Lumdus, and he has a lot to say about chinuch and this sugya in Masechet Nazir. So we'll see how this sugya actually has an impact on many, many different sugyas in Shas. It's a very perfect example for me personally to take upon myself one sugya that's connected to Daf Yomi in the week's Daf Yomi, but yet is related to all of Shas. If you'll take a look, the Gemara is quoted here on the right column on page Ches in the paragraph Uve Gemara, the second paragraph of Gemara, and then after the Gemara establishes that according to Reish Lakish, only a father is obligated in the chinuch of his son, not a mother, the Gemara raised a different question, and that is, why does the Mishnah limit the Kabbalah's Nazirus of a father vis-a-vis his son and not expand it to a Kabbalah's Nazirus vis-a-vis his daughter? And according to Rabbi Yochanan, there's no question, because that's the halacha l'Moshe b'Sinai, that a father could be makabel Nazirus on behalf of his son, but there's no halacha l'Moshe b'Sinai that a father could be makabel Nazirus on behalf of his daughter. But according to Reish Lakish, that the whole enterprise is a takana d'Rabbanan, why wouldn't the Rabbanan include being Mazir his daughter? And the Gemara comes to the conclusion that with regard to the daughter, there's no mitzvah of chinuch. Now, what that means is that as far as Nazirus is concerned, which we said is a siag leprecious, that doesn't apply to a daughter, it only applies to a son.
Is it one of the 600 pages? Is it in one of the 600 pages?
So that's what we're going to discuss now. What is the source for the mitzvah of chinuch? And the Rambam is going to quote a pasuk in Mishlei. And the Torah says in Mishlei, Tanakh says, Chanoch lenar al pi darko. So this is the Rambam in the 17th chapter of Macholas Asuros. And the Rambam is going to be very important for us as we go along. The Rambam is not the only Rishon that invokes this pasuk Chanoch lenar al pi darko. The The Ritva, for example, in Masechet Sukkah, likewise quotes that pasuk as the source for the mitzvah of Chinuch. And it would seem that the mitzvah of Chinuch comes under a category which is between the Oraisa and the Rabbanon. It's right down the middle. It's what we call midivrei Kabbalah. Whenever we derive an obligation from Tanakh, but not from the 5 books of Moses, it's not the Oraisa, but it's midivrei Kabbalah. So this is an upgraded chiyuv of chinuch. And one of the issues that we want to discuss is whether or not the mitzvah of chinuch, which according to Reish Lakish is imposed upon the father vis-a-vis his son in the case of Nazirus, is that obligation limited to mitzvahs aseh, which are kumva aseh, or does it apply to lotas? What would be your sort of gut reaction? Yeah, I would say kal v'chomer, that if it applies to a mitzvah aseh, how much more so to mitzvahs los aseh? Because the general rule of thumb, if you're comparing esen to lotas, is that lotas is more chomer than an essay. Now, how do I prove that? Because the halacha requires that you give up every last penny in your bank account in order to avoid violating a lotas. In the case of an essay, the halacha is al yivazbeis yoser mi chomesh, which means the maximum amount of money you spend on an essay is up to 20% of your income.
How does that fit in with us say dochelos say?
So the Ramban in his Perush al Torah, Dafka in Parshas Yisro, discusses that question. Why is an essay over on a lotas, given that a lotas has more chomer than an essay? And the Ramban comes to the conclusion that since you're in a situation of dechia, therefore it's greater to serve the king by serving him in a positive kuvaseh than it is to violate his will, because you're only violating his will for a greater purpose, namely to serve the king. So serving the king, even if it involves violating a lotas, is greater than avoiding a lotas. But the Ramban agrees that lotas is more chomer than an essay. So therefore, we should establish a kal v'chomer. This kal v'chomer is going to be a problem which is raised by Tosfos. If you want to take a quick peek at Tosfos, I'll go a little bit shalo lefi say there. But Tosfos on Daf Chav Chesam and Beis here in Nazir, do you see the Dibra Maschel Beno in Bitolo? You see such a Tosfos? Chav Chet Amid Bet. You have it?
Mm-hmm.
Is it there? Beno in Bitolo?
Oh, yes, yes, it is. Yes, it is.
Oh, I just want to make sure I didn't invent a Tosfos. So Tosfos says the following, right? He says that Beno in Bitolo, according to Rabbi Yochanan, Kach halachi, that was the halach that we received. And now we get to Reish Lakish. According to Reish Lakish, the Gemara says, "Kasavar beno d'shayach b'mitzvos l'sheyagdil mutal al av lechancho, aval bito lo." So whatever that means, it means. We'll leave that for the time being because I want to get to the kash of Tosfos. Tosfos says v'tema. You see that? V'tema. Everybody have it? Yes, no, maybe so.
No,
You have it, Daniel?
no.
V'tema.
Yeah.
No, it's in Tosfos.
Yeah.
You didn't bring a Gemara. Okay, that's fine. So Tosfos says v'tema. Ha'amrinan bi alma, the Gemara establishes in Yevamos Daf Kuf Yud Daled, katan ochel nevelos, a katan is eating non-kosher ice cream, ein bezdin mitzuvin ola frisho. Bezdin is not obligated in the chinuch of being mafresh the katan from eating non-kosher food. Tosfos va'amar hach. Here it says in the Gemara, Rabbi Yossi Reb Chanina in the name of Reish Lakish says the af lechancho lasos mitzvos mutal ala av. So what is Tosfos asking? He has a Gemara that ain't bezdin mitzuvin lafrisho in the case of a lotasa, and he finds a stira here in our Gemara because Reish Lakish says that a father is obligated in the chinuch of the mitzvahs of his son. What bothers Tosfos?
I guess he assumes Bezdin and Ab are on the same level.
And just one more point. Absolutely, what you said is absolutely correct. If there's no chinuch for a lotas, because Bezdin ain't a mitzuvah lafrisho, and Bezdin could stand by watching idly as the child eats non-kosher ice cream, then how much more so in the case of an essay, there should be no chiyuv chinuch. Again, Tosfos is not differentiating at this point between Bezdin and a father, and Tosfos is assuming that Bezdin is really filling in for the father. If the father is not up there, standing at the plate, in other words, to be mechanech his son, then who's going to stand up at the plate in place of the father and pick up that same chiyuv of chinuch? It's Bezdin. Now, if Bezdin is not mitzuvah lafrisha in the case of a lotas, then how much more so there should be no chiyuv in the case of an essay, because which is more chomer? And a lotas is more chomer than an essay. So how can I'm just interpreting the Tosfos. If you have a better pshat in Tosfos, I'm always willing to hear it. I don't see a better pshat in Tosfos.
Maybe it's the same. Not
right, but if it's kal v'chomer, then it's even a stronger kasha. How could it be that there's no chinuch for a lotas and there's a chinuch for an essay?
Why should the chumrah of essay versus a lotas be relevant here?
The chumrah of a lotas over an essay.
Why is that relevant?
I'm saying if there's no chiyuv chinuch vis-a-vis a lotas, then certainly vis-a-vis an essay there should be.
Why are we assuming that chinuch is because there's a certain chumrah involved? We're not.
So what would be the,
kids
right, what would be the alternative? You're not mechanic your child to avoid a lotas. We're going to let him eat non-kosher.
Training to be margil someone
makes
a lot more sense in actively doing things. It makes a lot more sense.
That's the second answer to Tosfos. But let's go through the first answer to Tosfos first. Tosfos yesh lomar the chinuch lo shayach el lashiro lasos. Oh, this is the first answer to Tosfos. Right?
That doesn't really make sense.
Yesh lomar the chinuch lo shayach el lashiro lasos ulekayim mitzvos aval lashiro mi lavar, meaning mi lavar avera ein zeh chinuch. In other words, when it comes to an essay, which is a kuvas, then there's a mitzvah chinuch. But when it comes to a lotas, which is shevi altas, there's no mitzvah chinuch. So that could be, Daniel, what you were saying before. But basically, Tosfos is still accepting the analogy, the equation between Bezdin and the father. It's all on the same level. And the father, according to this understanding of Tosfos, like Bezdin, would not be chayiv to be mafresh his son from an isur. Okay, so now Tosfos has a problem. Hahu de perk basra de yuma. The Gemara says at the end of Masechet Yomi that what? That tinokos are ma'anin osan b'yom kippurim. Once they reach the level of higil lechinuch, then you have to impose upon the son or the daughter, depending upon the various ages, a fast for Yom Kippur. They have to fast on Yom Kippur. Now, l'chora, fasting on Yom Kippur is in lotas. Right, that you v'nisam es nafshel seichem means an lav habomachal essay that you're not allowed to eat. So we see that the mitzvah of chinuch applies even for a lotas, a shevi altas, and not eating, abstaining from eating. So Tosfos answers hainu kiyum mitzvah of v'nisam. Tosfos says now that v'nisam is not just a lotas, it's not just himanut from achila, but it's also a kiyum to bring yourself into a state of inui. And therefore it comes under chinuch. So again, Tosfos is of the opinion, A, chinuch of the father and the bezdin are equal, and B, chinuch only applies to mitzvahs aseh and not to mitzvahs los aseh.
I think Eli and I are probably still stuck on the fact that chinuch only applies to aseh, not a los
Right.
aseh. Like the idea of like getting a child to be misdraga.
Right. Educationally, it doesn't make sense.
It does make sense a little bit. If you look at the lashon that Tosfos uses, lahargil, it's a lot easier when you talk about to get somebody lahargil somebody to do something. It's to actually do something. Not doing something is not a hergel.
Okay, so let me ask you before we.
I'm not disagreeing completely. I'm just saying that there is something in building habits.
Okay, so building habits of Shmirat Shabbat means you can't just be Machal Shabbos.
I'm not saying that it's not there at all, but I'm saying that a positive action, there's more in creating habits.
One of the first sure we that was on. I remember the discussion we had about how hard it is to get your child up in the morning for getting him to go to bed.
Right.
And that was the proof of Atzei. It's more important to get the Atzei going.
Let's see.
But I think it was one of our first.
Right,
we had,
right. We spoke about the Gemara in Yevamos. Yeah, about
You spoke about the Shreif ice cream also.
yeah. That's
Yeah,
because
JJ's.
that's because when I was okay. Anyway, has to do with somebody called Dumbo. That was down in Florida. Anyway, the Odo Marie. The chinuch lo shayach el ba'av, alo be'inish achrina lo shayach. Now Tosfos is establishing a fundamental distinction between the father and Bezdin. Seinachinami, the Bezdin is not obligated in chinuch. The father is obligated in chinuch, and that will include both essay and lotus. Okay, so that's an important Tosfos that we should keep in mind. Now, the Ramban ala Torah, if you get back to page Ches, on the left column, he says the following, that in the mitzvah of Hakel, we find that the Torah says that the Zachi of Hakel, even with regard to Taf. And that means that bringing the child to hear the Torah is a requirement. And says the Ramban that the Avos Yargilum v'Yechanchu Osam. So the language of the Ramban, by mentioning the word chinuch, seems to indicate that perhaps the source for chinuch is inherent in the parsha of Hakel. And Hakel vis-a-vis the Taf, according to the Ramban, is a chi of chinuch to be mechanech the son in mitzvos, in this case, in the mitzvah of hearing Torah. However, Meir Simcha has a very unique and original understanding of where in the Torah is the source, we find the source for chinuch. Ki dativ, the Torah says about Avram Avinu, leman asher yitzaves bonaves b'nei beiso achrov v'shamru derech Hashem. And this means that according to Chazal, Avram Avinu was Mekayim the Torah before it was given, and not only that, he left a legacy, training his children afterwards to be shomer derech Hashem. And it seems that, therefore, says Reb Meir Simcha Midvinsk, the mitzvah of chinuch, imposing an obligation on the father to be mechanech his son, is derived from the praise that HaKadosh Baruch Hu showers upon Avram Avinu. So we have here three different possible sources for the mitzvah of the father to be mechanech his son. Now he mentions here in the paragraph that starts Vidanu, what would be in a case of a mitzvah which the son, even after he becomes a gadol, would not be obligated in that mitzvah? And what would be a perfect example of that? Nazir. He's not obligated to Mikabel Nazirus. So this is a radical breakthrough. But again, we're going to, right now, just low profile, we'll mention the Rosh, that the Rosh says that chinuch applies not just to mitzvahs, but also to midos. Right, we have a mitzvah of v'alachta b'drachav, that we should imitate the midos of Hashem, imitation Odeo, and therefore precious is one of those midos that the Torah advocates in favor of, and it might even come under the mitzvah of what? Kiddoshim Tiyu.
It's along those lines. It's not really trying to avoid pares and avoid certain averos. It's a hagilo to get a certain personality and
right, a personality of mitzvahs. So a personality of mitzvahs might apply in the case of Nazirus. And therefore the Kabbalah's Nazirus of the father is like a training of the son for his future. But if there would be a mitzvah that the God will be potter on, then we're not sure that there would be chinuch. Because chinuch is largilo b'mitzvah she'yischayev behem begadluso. If you have a mitzvah shelo yischayev bo begadluso, then there's no chinuch. The Pri Megadim says that a cheresh shot of a katan, he says there's no mitzvah of chinuch, but he doesn't say because the way we said it in the name of the minchas chinuch, because he's not asid lihischayev b'mitzvah. That could have been one explanation, but rather he offers a substitute explanation, and that is because the cheresh shel tvekadon, it's very, very difficult to be mechanech them, and therefore the Torah or the Rabbanah did not impose that chi of chinuch. Would there be enough gemina between the minchas chinuch? I'm sorry, Cheresh and Shot. You're right. I mentioned Kotna. That's what's the word called a shigra delush, right? Like it always says chalutza when it says grusha, right? So what happens here? Let's say you had a cheresh and you could actually establish that the cheresh could understand and be trained in mitzvahs. Today, for example, we have all sorts of modern technology. I remember when I was a Rebbe in Shalavim, there was a Rebbe who was an expert in this field. They were using computers, for communication with deaf people. And it was amazing the results that they had. Rav Serevnik, if anybody heard the name. In any event,
deaf and mute.
Definitely.
Right, he's deaf and he's mute, both. That's a cheresh. All right, now we move on to page Tes. If you take a look in the second paragraph, the Rishonim asked the following question: how could it be that our sugya assumes that only a mother is obligated in the chinuch of a child based on Reish Lakish, and not only a father, but not a mother? The Gemara in Sukkah speaks about Heleni Amalka, and she was very meticulous about guaranteeing that her children, many of them were young children, would sit in a kosher sukkah. So on this point, we're going to have a major division here between the Tosas Yishanim and the Trumas Hadeshin. Tosas Yishanim is one of the Balei Tosas. The Trumas Hadeshin is a much later Ashkenazic, we'll call it a Rishon, but in the late period of the Rishon. So the Tosas Yishanim says the following: that the story of Heleni Amalka with regard to Sukkah is the following: Shema havi lehem av v'chincham bekach, v'afil lo hoya lehem av hoysem mechanchasam lemitzvah bi'alma. So let's underline these two words, mitzvah ba'alma. And in Mitzvah Hashem, as we go along, we'll try to understand and unlock the mystery of this very ambiguous, undefined phrase in the Tosas Yishanim, mitzvah ba'alma. Basically, according to Tosas Yishanim, the bottom line is a mother is not obligated in chinuch. However, she is obligated in some sort of, let's call it a generic chinuch, which is called mitzvah ba'alma. Okay, then? That's the maskana of the Tosas Yishanim. So the Tosas Yishanim is very deeply rooted or anchored in our Gemara in Masechet Nazir. And the bottom line is that any sugya that you find in Shas that a mother is obligated in chinuch, don't take it literally. It's only lemitzvah bi'alma, whatever that means. However, the Trumas Hadeshin is not happy because he has a Gemara in Eruvin, and the Gemara in Eruvin is going to prove that even a mother is obligated in the mitzvah of chinuch vis-a-vis her children, not a mitzvah bi'alma, but chinuch per se. Where does the Trumas Hadeshin see this in Eruvin? The Mishnah establishes in Eruvin that we will set up an Eruv called an Eruv Tchumen, allowing one to exit the outer boundaries of the city even beyond 2,000 Amma on behalf of a Katan. So the Gemara asks the following question. We have a Mandiyomar, this is one of the basic issues in Eruv Tchumen, whether or not we could make an Erev Tchumen just for the sake of, I want to go on a spatzir, or there's got to be a mitzvah. Let's say, for example, Dicham Avelim or Bikur Cholim, and I can only reach the next city if I go beyond the city limits, even more than 2,000 Amma. And one Mandiyomar says, Ein ma'arvin el lidvar mitzvah. Now, a katan is not mechuyev in mitzvahs. So how could we be ma'arev on behalf of a katan if Ein ma'arvin el lidvar mitzvah? Again, on the side, the Gemara's kash is very difficult because, you only need a dvar mitzvah to be mater eruvin if there's someone who's included in the iser of chutz l'tchum, and a katan is not included in the avera, and therefore we don't have to limit his tchum. But again, that's a side issue. So the Gemara's answer is very relevant to us today. The Gemara answers that even for a katan, his mitzvah, let's say he has a nicham avelim or a bikur chol, his mitzvah has the status of a mitzvah. And why? Because we are obligated to be mechanechim in mitzvahs. Now, the Gemara says over there that we're talking about a case where the father is not in the city and the mother is now in charge of the Eruv. And the Gemara says, nevertheless, we will be ma'arev because of the mitzvah of chinuch katan, even though the father is not in the city. And why? Because the mother is in the city. So the Trumas Hadeshin derives from this Gemara, this sugya in Erev Daf Pei Beis, that a mother is obligated in the mitzvah of chinuch, and that's why we're ma'ariv l'katan on behalf of the mother because of her chiyuv, her mitzvah of chinuch. And if it was only, as the Tosi Shana would say, a mitzvah b'alma, it would not be enough to be matir an erev lidvar mitzvah, because lidvar mitzvah means that there is a mitzvah of chinuch, not some sort of general whatever it is mitzvah b'alma.
Chinuch of what? It seems to be a low taser against Tosfos.
No,
erev is actually a mitzvah. We make a bracha on.
Yeah, but you only need the erev
to go do a Dvar mitzvah though. That's
no, but he wouldn't be. There would be nothing wrong with him carrying at his age. So you wouldn't even need the erev to start with. So what is the chinuch? What's the chinuch of the child? The making the erev, or the fact that he shouldn't be carrying a Shabbos with l'kum?
No, we're being mechanichim in a mitzvah, whatever that mitzvah is. I called it nichum avelu.
But you only get. But why do you need that mitzvah?
Because we're not going to be ma'ariv unless there's a dvar mitzvah. According to that mandiyom, we're only ma'ariv because he has to go to another city which is outside the tchum in order to be mekayim his mitzvah.
But if he's able to go outside the tchum because there's no mitzvah chinuch of lotas, so you don't. It doesn't even get started.
You're right, Eli. Again, we don't understand the entire sugya because lechora there's no lotas by cotton. I'm leaving that out.
Okay.
I'm just trying to point out one thing, that it seems that a mother shares the mitzvah of chinuch, and therefore for that mitzvah we can make an erev on behalf of the cotton.
This Gemara supports also Tosfos' answer before that there's a difference in Bezdin and the father.
You mean Bezdin would not
the
be?
Gemara is assuming if the father's not around, then it obviously goes to the mother. If Bezdin
well, I think
was
I think that's explicit in the sugyas and kiddushin there by Mila, that it only goes over to Bezdin after the mother. So there's a whole hierarchy. First it goes to the father, and then to the mother, then to Bezdin. All right. In any event, if somebody could do me a favor, just because of pressure for time, could you look up who the Orech Mishar is? I think I have the sefer somewhere, or probably I gave it away by now. But anyway, so the Orech Mishar says the following. He says, it seems from the Trumas Hadeshin that the mother is obligated in the mitzvah of chinuch like no less than the father. What are you going to do? And that was the proof of the Trumas Hadeshin for the Gemara in Erevin. But what are you going to do with our sugya Masechet Nazir, where the Gemara comes to the conclusion that a father's makabel nazirus for his son, a mother does not have to be makabel nazirus or cannot be makabel nazirus for her son because she's not obligated in the mitzvah of chinuch. So now the question becomes how to reconcile our sugya Nazir with the sugya in Erevin based on the Trumas Hadeshin, who understood that the Mavur Mikan, what we derive from Erevin, is that a mother is obligated in chinuch. So the Aruch Mishar wants to say the following. He says, Af shemavur you have this paragraph, or if you want to see it inside. Af shemavur b'sugyasenu, she'ena av mechuyev l'chanech es b'na, ein ze kusha al divrei Trumas Hadeshin, based on the sugya in Erevin. Okay, so let's just summarize this Aruch Mishar. I don't have to go through it inside. Basically, the Aruch Mishar has the following breakthrough. The whole sugya of aim as opposed to av is Reish Lakish. We don't paskin like Reish Lakish. We paskin like Rabbi Yochanan. And he wants to suggest that according to Rabbi Yochanan, the mitzvah of chinuch would extend even as far as the mother is concerned. Now, keep in mind, Rabbi Yochanan didn't say anything to indicate that a mother is obligated in chinuch. But the Aruch Mishar finds like an opening here. He says, since the whole sugya in Nazir is explaining Reish Lakish, and Rabbi Yochanan never accepted Reish Lakish, therefore we're free to assume that the sugya in Erevin that imposes a chi of chinuch on the mother reflects the sheet of Rabbi Yochanan. It's very, very technical. Okay. Now we get to the main subject of today, which is the issue of what mitzvah b'alma means in the Tosi Yeshanim in Yuma and the Chakira. Well, again, there are many, many Chakiras in Chinuch, but the main Chakira, at least for our purposes. And that is, what is the nature of the mitzvah of Chinuch? Is it that the Torah or the Rabbanan are imposing this mitzvah on the father, and it's purely his mitzvah? And the son does not have any chiyuv. He's a katan, he's la bar chiyuva. Or is it not that way? The father is really only there as, shall I call it, a supervisor to encourage, to guarantee that his son will fulfill the son's obligation of chinuch. Are you with me so far? So again, as we know, I mean, this is not new to you. You're all familiar with this famous Hakira. Is the mitzvah of chinuch imposed on the father or on the son? And then we'll get to the concept of mitzvah BIyun.
It's hard because it starts with this premise that the katan is not a bar chiyuv. So now we're going to come up with some kind of formulation of a mitzvah that's going to be applied on a katan who's not a bar chiyuv and say that there's a mitzvah.
Right.
It's, in other words, the former seems much more logical.
Correct.
It would be on a
But keep in
bar
mind,
chiyuv.
Chaim, that there are indications that a katan has a maisa mitzvah and a maisa avera. I think we had a long discussion about this in the past. You may remember the case of Shifcha Charufa. Imagine a katan who's 9 years old. He's a bar hachiyabiyah, has a relation with a Shifcha Charufa that's a chetzi shifcha, and he has to bring a karban, or at least she has to bring a karban. And if she brings a karban, it's for a maisa avera. And this was a great machlokas between Rabbi Akiva Eiger and Rabbi Chaim. And they battled this out over and over again in many different ways, in many different forms. And Rabbi Akiva Eiger understood that a katan is not capable of a maisa, and the maisa of a katan is not recognized in halacha. And Rabbi Chaim was very, very opposed to this. And of course, the case of Shifcha Haruf is a proof that a katan has a maisa avera, which generates a chiyuv karban. In fact, Reb Chaim was of the opinion that a katan is capable of a maisa hezek, because the Hagosa Shri in Perek HaChovel, Baba Basra, says if a katan was chovel begadol, then although we can't force him to pay now because he's a katan, and ein tovin is a katan lebezdin, but after he becomes a gadol, he'll have to pay for the hezek that he instigated when he was a katan. So you see, says Reb Chaim, that a katan is capable of a maisa, and that's a maisa hezek, a maisa avera, a maisa mitzvah. And the Mishnah Berurah goes into tirades against those who give their children a lemon instead of an esrog. The chiyuv is to give the katan exactly. Again, that doesn't prove a thing because it could be it's a father's chiyuv. But again, if you hold that the katan is capable of a maisa mitzvah, it becomes a lot more exciting. And then we're going to see the Gemara in Brachos, which I have here in this Masechet, and that is that a katan could be motzi a gadol in Birkas Hamazon, and that's wild. Okay, again, yeah, excellent. We'll have a lot of discussion about that. I'm just because Chaim, was bothered by this. How can you possibly suggest that a katan is chayiv in the mitzvah of chinuch? That Gemara is going to be very, very
well.
relevant.
The nafkamina then would be where.
Whoops, you okay, Yaakov?
Yeah.
Oh, you got me nervous. Oh, I thought maybe you fell.
Well,
Okay.
the nafkamina then be Roberts on whether the bezdin and the aim are on the same level. Depends if it's really a mitzvah on the father, specific to the father, or it's mitzvah on the.
I'm not sure I understand what you're saying. We had a Hakira as to whether or not the mother is obligated in chinuch and bezdin is obligated in chinuch. And you want to say that's related to this question? I didn't see that. Well, Fan, go ahead.
Because if it's on the child, then really bezdin and the mother are filling in to be like overseers, supervisors, right? To make sure. But if it's a mitzvah specifically on the ab, maybe it's something specifically ab, but the bezdin and the mother are not on the same level as the ab.
Okay, that could be very good. I think that's a very interesting chiddush. You should write a shtickle Torah, but you have to research it.
I'm just suggesting. I'm not.
No. It's an interesting idea. So let's now begin to understand the insights here of Rab Ruvain in Masechet Sukkah, Chidushei Rab Ruvain. And you'll see a paragraph that starts with the word ubir. He says that even according to the Trumas Hadeshen, who maintains based on the Sugya and Eruvin that a mother is obligated in chinuch, perhaps there's a fundamental difference between the mother and the father. And that's going to explain and reconcile the sugya in Erevin, which assumes that a mother is obligated in the chinuch of a son as opposed to our sugya in Nazir. He says the following. A father is obligated in the mitzvah of chinuch as a chiyuv on the father. That's what he calls ha'av atzmo, which you'll see about 8 lines down in this paragraph. You want to underline those words. Geder chiyuvo, in the case of a father, sha'av atzmo chayav b'chinuch b'no. He calls it a chovas gavra. However, in the case of a woman, of a mother, eino chiyuv gavra. And like Bezdin, the chiyuv is only lid'og, in order to guarantee, oversee, and supervise, l'sayea l'kiyum chovasam shel acherim, and in this case, the kiyum chovaso of the child. So he says that there's going to be an nafkamina, and that is, would the father have to spend money on the chinuch of his child? If it's a chovas gavra, then Rabbi Ruvain assumes, again, we have to see it in the inside, all his proofs for this, that with regard to a chovas gavra, you have to spend money up to 20% of your income on a chovas gavra. But if it's only that you want to aid and supervise and facilitate the kiyum chov of somebody else, you don't have a chovas gavra, therefore you would not have to shell out a dime for that. So therefore, we can now explain what the Gemara means here in Nazir as far as exempting the mother, and that could work out even according to Rabbi Yochanan, because the mother doesn't have that chovas gavra. She really belongs to the category of Bezdin, which is only a chiyuv l'sayea and lid'og l'kach, that the ben should implement his chiyuv. And now if you take a look at the paragraph Ubechidushe Reb Ruvain, he says the following, that maybe we can put Nazirus into a separate category. Let's read it inside. Yesh lomar shegam ilu nemer ha'em shehi mechuyeves kegeder chiyuv av mitzvahs chinuch. He means afilim timtzalomer, that a mother shares a chovas gavra in chinuch vis-a-vis her child. However, with regard to Nazirus, the chiyuv is limited to the father and not to the mother. This is very exciting. What he wants to say is follows, that even if you want to go with the Trumas Hadeshin and take the Gemara and Erevin to its logical conclusion, to its extreme conclusion, that a mother shares the chovas gavra of chinuch of a father, nevertheless, I can justify our Gemara Nazirus by saying that in Nazirus there's a separate din of a chiyuv on the father to the exclusion of the mother. Why is that so? And he says the following, that with regard to a father, in Nazirus, we don't understand b'chlal. How is it that the father is chayiv in a chiyuv chinuch vis-a-vis Nazirus? He says Nazirus is totally begufo. How can you take a person's personal gufo chiyuv in Nazirus and impose it on the father? The father doesn't have the goof of the son. Are you with me? Again, this is Reb Ruvain's kasha. He says the whole sugya of Nazirus in terms of chinuch is a tzarich in gadol, because you can say that somehow, the father has a chiyuv vis-a-vis his son's mitzvos to be mechanech his son, and that becomes a chovas gavra on the father. But that doesn't make sense in the case of Nazirus, because accepting upon oneself Nazirus means to transform the guf into a guf for Nazir. Does that come under chinuch? And he says the following, that the mitzvah of chinuch in Nazirus, this is in the paragraph from Mavur, the last paragraph on page Tes, is a separate bezunder halacha. Osu es ha'av kimo ben atzmo legabi din chinuch. Now, what does that mean? That with regard to Nazirus, the father becomes like the son. And not only in Nazirus, but from Nazirus, he wants to jump off a keresh kfitza and assume that the entire entity of chinuch in the case of a father is that the father becomes like the ben. And that's why it's a chovas gavra. And the only source that I see he quotes over here, again, maybe he has other sources, is Ha'av Nenash al Chet Bino. In the footnote, he says that when the father recites the bracha, Baruch Shef Torani Me'on Shel Zeh, it means that up to a certain age, I don't know exactly what that age is, maybe till age 20, I don't know, the father is going to be punished for the sins of his son. He's responsible for his son. And therefore, on the third line here in this paragraph, he says, Sha'av hu mamish tachas haben, which means he's like kigufo shel haben. And that's going to spill over into Nazirus, because as we said before, who has bailus for Nazirus? It's only the goof of the person who's accepting upon himself Nazirus. But now if we're saying that the father in the context of Chinuch is mamish tachas beno ukigufo, therefore the father could be makabel Nazirus for his son. Ulam, however, it's aim. All right, she has a general mitzvah of Chinuch. However, she's not considered tachas beno bechiyuvo. Ella. So that's where the difference is between a father and a mother. The Torah imposed special obligations and responsibilities on a father that are not incumbent on a mother. Again, you might not want to, publicize this because maybe it's not politically correct today. But the father has a special din of chinuch vis-a-vis his children, midin kigufo mamish, tachas beno ukigufo, which is not the case of a mother. And the nafkamina now is going to be the case of Nazirus, because in the case of Nazirus, the only chovas chinuch that we can have, according to Reb Ruvain, is a chovas chinuch that is generated by kigufa. Ulegabi lahadir ben Nazir tzach sheyeh tachas beno. I'm going to add the word kigufo. V'zeh shayach dafka be'av. And therefore, the Trumas Hadeshin is of the opinion that even though, as we derive from the Gemara in Erev, there is a chiyuv chinuch of the mother vis-a-vis a son, but it's not that level of chinuch that would kick in to Nazirus, because what kind of level of chinuch do we need to generate a Nazirus of the parent for the son? That's only a Nazirus, that's only a chinuch of what? Of kigufo and tachas beno, which is only applicable to the father because of his special unique responsibilities vis-a-vis his children.
For this Ben and Bat, we're not making a distinction. This is not necessarily male to male.
I don't think he's making that distinction, as far as I can tell. But you're right. I mean, that also requires research. So, Abosai, I would like to. I find this very profound. I'm not saying I understand it 100%, but I find it very profound. I want to suggest, if you can give me just 1 minute, because I just want to give my own little twist or perspective on this chiddush of Rab Ruvain. I want to suggest the following. What does Rab Ruvain mean when he says that Kabbalas Nazirus is tluya bebailim al gufo? That's his language. Totally bebailim al gufo. And I would like to suggest the following. That in all mitzvahs, we have a chiyuv called a maisa mitzvah. However, Nazirus is different. Nazirus is not a maisa mitzvah. It's much more fundamental, much more profound. Nazirus is to be kovea in a brand new way, the gufo shel adam. Nazirus is a change, it's a metamorphosis, if you will, of the gufo shel adam. The maisa mitzvah is a result of that metamorphosis, that change in the gufo shel adam.
The mitzvah is not becoming a Nazir. The mitzvah is what a Nazir has to do after he's a Nazir.
Okay, so let's say like this. Kabbalas Nazirus, right? He says Kabbalas Nazirus hu totally bebailim al gufo. That's the lashon that he quotes here in Reb Ruvain. So what I'm suggesting is that whatever mitzvahs the Nazir is obligated in, it's all a result of his Kabbalas Nazirus. And what is Kabbalas Nazirus? It's a transformation of the gufo shel adam. Right? Remember we discussed, for example, whether Nazirus is a chovas hefzer or a chovas gavra. Remember we spoke about yayin. So we suggested, according to the Rosh at the beginning of Nidarim, that Nazirus is a chovas gavra because he's changing his very guf. I'm not saying he's making a biological change, but al pi din, in a legal sense, he is transforming his guf. He's now Nazir Kodesh al Rosho. He's got Nazirus in his very body. And we could say the following, that maybe we could connect this Chiddush of Rab Ruvain with what we saw here on the right page, Donu Achronim, towards the end of page Ches, about a mitzvah that will not be obligatory when this katan becomes a gadol. Is there chinuch? And maybe Nazirus, in the sense that it requires a transformation of the guf. The Torah did not obligate anyone to transform his guf into Kedushas Nazirus. And therefore, the question of Reb Ruvain is a very pressing question. How could there be a mitzvah of chinuch imposed on the father to transform the son, the gufo, into a Nazir when nobody's obligated to make that transformation? And perhaps Rabbi Yochanan would hold that the halach l'Moshe Sinai was mechadesh, that in the case of a father, the father is like the guf of the ben, and therefore he could be makabel nazirus, but only the father, not the mother. So that even though Reish Lakish, and here I'm arguing against the Orach Misha that we learned earlier, who says that Rabbi Yochanan would reject Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan would hold that a mother is obligated. According to Rabbi Ruvain's breakthrough, I don't know if we have to say that. We could say now that even according to Rabbi Yochanan, a mother is not obligated in Kabbalah's Nazirus, as the Gemara assumes here in Reish Lakish. Rabbi Yochanan would agree with that. And the reason for that is that the halacha Moshe Sinai is mechadesh, that the father can be makabel nazirus because the father's guf is like the son's guf, and therefore he can transform his body into a nazir. But as far as a mother is concerned, she's obligated in general in the mitzvahs of chinuch, as the Trumas Adeshin derived from the sugya in Erevin. So there's no stira now between the sugya in the Nazirus and the sugya in Erevin as far as the status of a mother is chinuch, even according to Rabbi Yochanan. So what Rabbi Yochanan would derive from the halacha Moshe Sinai, Reish Lakish would derive al pi svara in the context of the mitzvah of chinuch. Yeah, you wanted to say something, yeah? Or
so is that the only nafkamina?
nafkamina between what and what?
Saying that it's the group is only on the ab.
Right.
Is Nazir then the only nafkamina between a father and a mother?
Correct. And that's the sugya Nazir. But we can maintain the principle as we derive it from Erevin, that a mother like a father is obligated in chinuch.
No, he already said before, being Mammon in other, he already mentioned other nafkaminas.
Oh, that a father has to spend money
The mother wouldn't.
for the mitzvah of chinuch. Oh, is that what you mean? Yeah. We said that the father has a special responsibility because he's punished for the sins of his son. And if that be the case, then he'll have to spend money for the mitzvah of chinuch. But as far as the difference between a father and a mother, both in terms of mammon and in terms of Nazir, Reb Ruvain's breakthrough is that our sugya Nazir should be seen in a separate vein. It's only in Nazir where the father has that upgraded status. Okay, now the question is the sugya in brachos. Okay, then? How are we doing on the clock? Just give me can we?
2 minutes.
Okay, so I'm going to go over time. Anyone who could stay, vakasha. If you can't stay, I'll talk to myself. Because we started late, so I don't want to get cut off here because we have a major sugya here in brachos. Now, we're on page Yud. Everybody has that. And just 1 second. Where's the Ramban? Did I skip the Ramban? No. Oh. So I'm sorry. We're on page Yud Aleph. My mistake.
There.
Now,
It's okay, we're skipping that. It's fine.
Okay. So you'll see on page Yud Aleph on the right side a paragraph that starts Yisod. The Mishnah says in Megillah, there's a machlokes between Rabbi Yehuda and Chachamim. Can a katan read the Megillah and be motzi a gadol? The Chacham say no, and Rabbi Yehuda says yes. The Gemara in Brachos on Daf Chaf has a diyun as to whether women are obligated in Birkas Hamazon Doraisa, and the nafkamina would be, can a woman recite Birkas Hamazon on behalf of her husband? Because if she's not obligated Doraisa, then the halach of Arus doesn't kick in because she's only obligated D'Rabbanan. So the Gemara asks the following question. What about the case of a katan? It says that a ben katan mevarach li aviv. How could a ben katan make a bracha Birkas Hamazon on behalf of his father if he's only chayav mitzad the mitzvah of chinuch? V'tirtzu, Tosfos says that a woman is motzi acher midei chovasam, like a son who can be mevarach on behalf of his father, even according to the Man Yomi who says a woman is only chayav midrabanan. And he says that the father ate only a kizayis of pas, and the mother ate a kibetza or kidei svir, whatever it is. So she is chad d'Rabbanan, and he is also chad d'Rabbanan. So then, if that be the case, why is she chad d'Rabbanan? Because she's parted from Birkas Hamazon, according to that man, the Yomi, she doesn't have Nachla in Eretz Yisrael, blah, blah, blah. And he's only chayav d'Rabbanan because he only ate a kizayis, not kidei svir. So frektosis, how could it be that a son is motzi his father, Yidei Chovaso? After all, this is a case of trade d'Rabbanan. Why? Because the katan is only chayav midrabbanan. Just 1 second.
The Megillah is trade.
Just 1 second. Megillah, I'm sorry. I see when I don't want to do a botched job, but on the other hand, I don't want to miss this piece. Again. So here's the question. In the case of the Chachamim in Masechet Megillah, Tosfos asks, why can't the katan be motzi the gadol? It's just like the case of a husband who ate only what? Kidei kizayis, and therefore he's only chayav d'Rabbanan. His wife, even though she's only chayav d'Rabbanan, she can be motzi her husband. So here, everyone's only chayav in Megillah d'Rabbanan. Why can't the katan, according to the Rabbanan of Rabbi Yehuda, be motzi the gadol? And here Tosfos says because of trei d'Rabbanan. Tirza Tosfos, af shemitzvah d'Rabbanan he came in the katan and chayav elam in Rabbanan b'chol mitzvahs. So in the case of Megillah for a katan, it's a double d'Rabbanan, havile trei d'Rabbanan, and therefore he can't be motzi everyone else who's a gadol who has only chad d'Rabbanan. They're not on the same level. So the ikar chiyuv, if you're on the top left column here, is b'shar mitzvahs hu min Torah. In the case of a gadol, he has the ikar chiyuv min Torah. Like for example, in Birkas Hamazon, he's chayav d'oraisa in the ikar chiyuv. V'im kain Eino ela chad d'Rabbanan. As far as the gadol is concerned, it's only chad d'Rabbanan. But as far as the katan is concerned, it's trei d'Rabbanan. So what would be Rabbosai if the katan would eat a full shear of kidei svia, and now he wants to bench and be motzi his father who only ate a kizayis? So that would be chad d'Rabbanan. Tosfos in Masechet Brachos on Daf Chaf Amud Beis, which I have here, says, according to at least one teretz in Tosfos, that there the katan should be able to be motzi the gadol. Why? Because the katan, had he been a gadol, would be chayav. He ate kidei svir, and if it's only chad d'Rabbanan, and the gadol is also only chad d'Rabbanan because he ate less than kidei svir. All that is according to Tosfos, but the Ramban has a different shita, and the Ramban is both in his Pirush al Torah and in his commentary on Milchemes Hashem on the Rif. And the Ramban quotes Rashi in Brachos Memches, that's the paragraph Ukidivrei, and he says the following, that if a person eats a Kizayis Dagon, he can be Motzi Achem Yidei Chovasan, even though his Chiv is only D'Rabbanan. But he says, V'im Tomar, B'katan Shigil L'chinuch, Lo Amrin Hachi, is Ahu Afilu M'Rabbanan Lo Mechai, Dalei Di'avua Hu D'Rami L'chanuche. So the Ramban Shita is that you could never ever imagine a katan being motzi a gadol against Tosfos. Tosfos understood that a katan could be a chad rabban if he ate kidei svia, and therefore he could be motzi a gadol only ate kizayis, and it's chad rabbanan, and he's a gaver bar chiyuva, he could be motzi a gadol. The Ramban says a katan is never chayiv in mitzvahs, never ever. Even as far as chinuch, the mitzvah of chinuch is incumbent upon whom? Yeah. Upon the av. So therefore, in the paragraph of Ripshuto, the machlokas here between Tosfos and the Ramban as to whether a cotton could be motzi a gadol in Birkas Hamazon is this chakira. What is the gather of the mitzvah of chinuch? If the chinuch is on the son, then although it's chad rabbanan, but he's a bar chiyuva. If on the other hand the chiyuv is on the father, then he's not a bar chiyuv at all. He can never be motzi a gadol. And here we have another chiddush of Rabbi Reuven. So the question is, if you could stay for an extra 5 minutes, fine. If you can't, you can't. But this is really beautiful. There's an Achron called the Chikrei Lev, maybe somebody could look up what his name was, and he says that even according to Tosfos, the mitzvah is only incumbent upon the father and not on the son. So then the question becomes, how could the son be motzi the father in Birkas Hamazon, in the case of Chad Rabbanon, when he's not a Bar Chiyuv at all? And the Chikrei Lev says that although he's not a Bar Chiyuv, but he has a Ma'aser Mitzvah. Cotton has a Ma'aser Mitzvah. And therefore his bracha is considered a bracha. It's a cheftz of a bracha, even though there's no Chovas Gavra. And Reb Reuven rejects this. He says it doesn't make any sense. If you're going to tell me that there's no chiyuv on the ben, then he's a gavra lav bar chiyuva. If he's not a bar chiyuva, then he can't be motzi anyone. And furthermore, the Reb Reuven asks the kasha on the Ramban. Forget about the Chikrei Lev. He doesn't understand the Ramban. How could the Ramban say that the chiyuv is only on the father, not on the son, when the Rishonim say, not all Rishonim, but Bezdin has a chiyuv of chinuch. In other words, Bezdin fills in for the father, if need be, to fulfill the mitzvah of chinuch. According to the Ramban, that doesn't make any sense. I don't know, Eli, is this what you were saying before? I'm not sure. Because the Ramban holds that there's no mitzvah on the son. So what does it mean? This is Taki Yosfara. Yeah. Now you can write the shtickle Torah. Okay.
It's been written already.
Right. So you can support and enhance. He's saying,
later I would be saying,
Ma shayach chiyuv bezdin be ofen she'eno av. You can talk about a chiyuv bezdin to pick up the chiyuv of the father, replace the father if the father's not able or whatever it is, he's not being mekayim the chiyuv. But if we're going to say, just 1 second, even though v'kedas Ramban she'ena mitzvah klal ben el shu mitzvah av, why should Bezdin be obligated to fill into the shoes of the father? That's a special chiyuv on the father. But if you're going to say that that the chiyuv is on the ben, then I understand that Bezdin has to also, like the father, oversee and guarantee, supervise that the ben will be mekayim his chiyuv. But according to the Ramban, why is there a chiyuv on Bezdin?
You're not looking at things very, very technically. At the end of the day, it was the father's mitzvah. It's the father's mitzvah to be mechanech the son. When his father's not around, someone else needs to do that, regardless of whose chiyuv it's technically going to be.
You mean
a boy who doesn't have a father? That's it. No.
The assumption, the premise here is not proven, right? What's the premise he's operating with? That if there's a chiyuv on the father, that's chinuch. Chinuch means the father is obligated to chinuch, but not Bezdin. Bezdin could have a general kind of obligation to see to it that the mitzvahs are fulfilled. But to say that they have a specific chiyuv of chinuch when the chiyuv is on the father, says Reb Reuven, that doesn't make any sense.
Wouldn't this nafkamina also apply then to going back to Naziris? Meaning, if you say the whole thing is Nazirus because it's the Gufo, the Av, and only the Gufo, the Av could then impart it on the Ben. If you say the mitzvah of chinuch is really on the Ben to start with, a chiv of Ben, so then how would you have a chinuch of Nazirus when there was nothing from the Ben to get started to be mechayiv him in Nazirus to start with?
Yochanan doesn't say exclusive. That's
What I'm saying is if you're going to say this,
so that's what we said, that the goof of the father is like the goof of the Ben.
but that would only work if you say the chiv of chinuch is on the Av. Meaning that
well, let's go with Rabbi Yochanan, for example. Allah Moshe Sinai establishes the father can be Kabbalah Nazirus for his Ben. So we're saying that the father, through this Allah Moshe Sinai, has like the status of Gufo Shel Ben. Fine. Now we get to Reish Lakish. According to Reish Lakish, Rabbanan established a Chiv Chinuch. And we're saying that the Chiv of Chinuch is on the Ben. But if we're saying that the Ben, again, let's assume the Ben needs Nazirus, like Precious and so forth, according to the Rav. So now, if the Ben himself is not personally fulfilling his obligation, then the father, insofar as through Chinuch, and based on the fact that he's responsible for the Chatoim and punished for the son, he's Gufo Shel Ben. So like the Ben, he has to see to it that there's a Kabbalas Nazirus. But let me see if we could just fit in one more thing over here, because I had a chiddush here that I wanted to share with you. He says the following. Af ledas Ramban, Geter din mitzvah chinuch u mitzvah ben. The Ramban never denies that the mitzvah of chinuch is on the ben. But then I don't get it. He says the following: if the chiyuv of chinuch is on the ben, even according to the Ramban, then we go back to the Kasha of Tosfos. Why is it that according to the Chachamim, a katan could not be motzi acher midei chavasam? Because now you're telling me the katan is a bar chiyuva. The whole point of the Ramban is that a katan is a la bar chiyuva. How could it be motzi a gadol? And the Ramban earlier, in a paragraph that started with the words ulam, right? Right, that's what the Ramban said. So I wanted to say the following: that what Reb Ruvain is saying here, if you take a look at the last line in the paragraph of Lachen, the Ikar Achiyuv hu Chovas Haben, what's the next word? Lihischanech. Do you see that? What I'd like to suggest is that this word lihischanech is the same as what the Tos Yeshanim called a mitzvah bi'alma, that a mother is obligated based on the Sugya and Erevin in a mitzvah di alma. What's a mitzvah di alma? We never came back to interpret that. And now he's saying that according to the Ramban, a katan cannot be motzi a gadol, even though the chiyuv chinuch is on the katan himself, on the ben himself, because ikar chiyuv he chovas haben lihischanech. So I'd like to suggest the following. I heard from my Rebbe in the name of his father, Moshe, that Yesh lachkar, what is chatzi shir asim in Torah? Is chatzi shir that particular averus? So when he eats a half of zayis of nevela, he's violating nevela, or is chatzi shir a din klali? This is separate general iser of chatzi shir, and Rav Moshe used to prove it from the fact that shir mitztarfin. You can take a chatzi shir nevela and a chatzi shir of dam, and you can mitzarif them. If the chatzi shir is that specific avera, you can't be mitzarif nevela to dam. But if it's a general mitzvah or an iser called chatzi shir, so I want to apply that here. What is the mitzvah of chinuch? Is the mitzvah of chinuch that particular mitzvah, or is it a general mitzvah of chinuch that doesn't take on the complexion of that mitzvah? And the two nafkaminas here. Nafkamina number one is going to be the case of an isha. The case of an isha, according to the Ramban, is going to be that her obligation is only lihischanech, meaning, or let me forget about the Ramban for a minute, let's use the Tos Yeshanim's language of mitzvah bi'alma. Mitzvah bi'alma means a general mitzvah, it's not a specific mitzvah. Correct? And number two, the nafkamina is whether a katan could be motzi a gadol, even though the Ramban agrees, says Reb Ruvain, that the mitzvah is on the katan, but it's not a chiyuv in that particular mitzvah, and therefore he's not a bar chiyuva. So the Ramban on the one hand could say that a katan can't be motzi a gadol, even if it's Chad Rabbanon, because he's not a Bar Chiyuva, and that's the Ramban Shita, but that only means that his chiyuv as a katan is a general chiyuv, like a mitzvah be alma lihis chanech, but there's no specific chiyuv vis-a-vis that mitzvah. It's not like
you have to go through that whole thing with Nazirus of Gufa and all that. If it's not that specific mitzvah, then you don't need to go through that whole mental gymnastics about Gufa if it's just the general mitzvah cleanup, right? Because we said we needed that whole thing of Gufa because Dafka by a Nazir it's affecting the Gufa.
There are two different parts, Eli. There's Roman numeral number 1, that's Reb Ruvain, who's trying to reconcile the Gemara in Eruvin with the Gemara here in Nazir. And there, Reb Ruvain wants to say that the Gemara in Nazir, which exclusively is on the father, that's because of the nature of the Nazir. So that's where we introduced that new upgraded status of the father as Kigufa. Now we're up to Roman numeral number 2, and that's the Ramban. We're trying to figure out, according to the Ramban, how could it be that the Ramban holds that there's no chiyuv of chinuch that's imposed on the child? Just one second.
It is on the child.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. According to the Ramban,
I understand.
Again, what was the language of the Ramban? Let's get the language of the Ramban. So we're all on the same page over here. The Ramban says that what? That 1 second. I'm sorry. That Lav mitzvah di day eladavua. Do you see that? The paragraph that starts ulam on the left column, number Yud Aleph. Eladavua. The iu lo machayva b'mitzvahs kol ikar. Now he's going with that side that a katan is a katan and he can't be mechuyev. However, Rabbi Yehuda's shita in the Mishnah, he can be motzi a gadol in what? In Megillah. That's because of afhein hoyibosa, and that's fine. Let's leave that out. But according to this, Reb Ruvain got stuck. Why? Because how could it be that Bezdin would have to? How could it be that if it's a separate chiv on the father, why would Bezdin have to step in to the shoes of the father? But if there's a chiv on the son, then we understand Bezdin. So now Reb Ruvain is saying the Ramban agrees that there's a chiv on the katan, and that's lischaneh. But I don't get it. The Ramban's whole point was to try to understand why a katan cannot be motzi a gadol, correct? Like even if it's chad d'Rabbanan, that's the Ramban shita, like Rashi, that Rashi says the alei the avuahu derami lechanuchi. So how are you going to reconcile that with Reb Ruvain's understanding of the Ramban, and then the Ramban is holding that the katan is a bar chiyuv, so why can't he be motzi a gadol? But what I'm suggesting is that with the new interpretation of the Ramban by Reb Ruvain, he's not saying that the Ramban shita in katan is equal to Tosas' shita, that the katan is a bar chiyuv. No. He's only saying that the chiyuv of a katan is lihischanech, and lihischanech is not a chiyuv generated by that specific mitzvah, and therefore the Ramban is right in his position that he cannot be motzi a gadol because he's not a bar chiyuva in that particular mitzvah. This is where we're going to stop. But if you take a look on page Yud Beis, there's 1 or 2 more paragraphs that we didn't get a chance to finish up. The last paragraph on Yud Aleph, Ubir Divrei Achikrei Leiv, and there Reb Ruvain wants to answer the question that the Ramban raises. I'm sorry, that he raised against the Chikrei Leiv, and here on Daf Yud Beis in the paragraph of Chidushay Reb Ruvain, he has another insight into Tosfos, and that perhaps could fit into what we said as a parallel to Rav Moshe. Okay, then. So this is where we'll stop. Wish you all a great Chodesh Adar.
Thank you.
You don't have to take it to the extreme, but this chakira is what might suggest that there is some sort of value of giving your son a lemon on Sukkos.
Right.
If the mitzvah is just to be margil, not in the mitzvah of in lulav. It's the mitzvah of you don't have to take it that far. But maybe at a certain age, we're just training him to be able to daven and holding something in his hands that somewhat resembles what that remaining would be.
Yeah. Okay.
No, I'm saying you don't have to take it that far. But if you're not actually chayv in the mitzvah of arba minim,
right.
It's a different mitzvah of chinuch. It doesn't have to be all the same pratim as the
facsimile would be sufficient.
Maybe no, you don't
We're
feel
not
like far.
trying to.
Yeah.
Like, but to the first thing, are we?
Do we make sure the time are actually yoked